Oh, good day. Good day. Good day. Good day. How's it going? I'm Bob McKenzie. This is my brother Doug.
How's it going? Hey,
We got two topics today: back bacon and long underwear.
Hello, and welcome to Honto Eigo, Japan's only 99.9% English podcast hosted at my dinner table. My name is Matt. I'm a Canadian living in Japan, and for today's topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about Canada, particularly Canadian stereotypes. What is a stereotype? A stereotype is kiseigainen, right? Kind of like this preconceived belief that people have about a person, a place, an activity, whatever. So when you think of Canada, what do you think of? Maybe you think of the Arctic tundra, you think of snow, right? Maybe you think of hockey. Maybe you think of maple syrup. So today I want to clarify, or I want to dispel a few of those stereotypes, right? I want to prove them right or prove them wrong. So, stereotype number 1. It's always cold in Canada. No, right? I would say that the Canadian winter time is quite long and cold relative to Japan. Let's say that it starts getting cold around November, and you might even see some snow in November, but usually we don't get snow until late December. More and more recently, we have what we call a green Christmas, right, as opposed to a white Christmas. No snow on Christmas time. The problem is, once the snow comes, it takes a long time going away. It's pretty common in Canada for there to be snow on the ground until April, sometimes even as late as May, until all the snow melts. Is it always cold in Canada? No. In the summertime, it does get pretty hot. It gets up to about 30 degrees Celsius. But I think the difference between Canadian summer and Japanese summer is the humidity. It's much more dry in Canada. So you're going to go out, you're probably going to get like a sunburn, right? The sun is quite hot. But it's not like Japan where you're going to be sweating from the humidity doing nothing, right? Japan is pretty humid. Now, in the wintertime in Canada, it does get quite cold, but it depends on where you are. When I lived in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada, right in the center of Canada, in the wintertime, it would get to about minus 30 degrees. And then when you add in the wind chill factor, we call it, with the wind as well, it can be about minus 40 in Ottawa. But that's on a really cold day. Generally in Canada, I would say that it's about minus 15 or minus 20. It might be more warm in Vancouver, though, and more cold in the east coast of Canada. Now, stereotype 2. We love maple syrup. Do Canadians love maple syrup? Who doesn't, right? I guess we love it enough to put a maple leaf on our flag, but I don't know. As a Canadian, I don't really feel like maple syrup is any part of my identity, as much as any other condiment, right? Ketchup or mustard. To me, maple syrup just feels like a condiment that I put on breakfast food, right? You put it on pancakes, you put it on waffles. That's about it. I don't even eat maple syrup that often, right? I think maybe just Canadians are proud of maple syrup as this delicious export that we send to other countries, just because we don't have that many things that we do export, We don't have this famous film industry. We don't have that much famous music. No, I shouldn't say that. We have a lot of famous music, but all of that becomes kind of Americanized. So maple syrup is the one thing that we have that the world loves and feels distinctly Canadian. But I wouldn't say that the average Canadian loves maple syrup more than anybody in the world, right? It's like honey. Stereotype 3, Canadians are very polite. I think a few countries have this kind of polite stereotype, this polite image. You know, some people say that British people are very gentlemanly, right? And people often say that Japanese people are very polite. I would put Canadians on the same level of politeness as Japanese people, right? Of course, no matter what country you go to, you're going to run into some pretty impolite people, right? Some pretty mean, nasty people. And Canada is no exception, right? There are lots of people in Canada who are very close-minded, right? There are some racist people, right, that don't like other types of people, right? There are bullies in Canada. There are whatever, right? That's true for any country that you go to. Generally, I think that the polite image of Canada comes from our tendency to apologize, right? This is another stereotype that Canadians have, that we always apologize and say, oh, sorry, sorry, sorry. And people always say that we do it with this Canadian accent, right? Ooh, sorry, sorry. Okay, you got me there. We do apologize a lot. We do apologize a lot. If someone steps on my foot on the bus, I'll probably look at them and say sorry, right? Oh, sorry, you stepped on my foot, right? And they'll say, oh, sorry, I stepped on your foot, right? We say sorry to each other. Again, that's not everybody, but I think it's just kind of a easy filler speech, right, that we use. But again, don't go to Canada expecting everyone to be super nice and pleasant. You know, I've been to some places in America that people are way more generous than they are where I'm from in Canada, right? People in Japan are sometimes very generous, but they can also be very cold, right? Again, that's just anywhere you go. So going back to the whole point of, ooh, sorry, sorry, this is the one that really gets me annoyed, right? The fourth stereotype, the Canadian accent, quote unquote. Do Canadians have an accent? Do I have an accent? Because in my mind, I'm speaking at what I would call the default English accent. You know what I mean? I don't think that I sound any different from like an American. But maybe, you know, I don't know. Sometimes when I'm working at a company in Japan, people will say to me, oh, you kind of have a Canadian accent, right? And I think, what the heck does that mean? What do I say differently, right? Because I definitely don't sound like the Canadian accent that Americans love to use in movies and media, right? Oh, hey, how you doing, bud? Oh, yeah, mighty cold, eh? You know, nobody, I've never met anybody that talks like that, right, in real life. The one thing that Canadians do have that people like to point out is our use of the word a as filler speech on the end of a sentence. We do it as a way to seek confirmation from our listener, right? Just like in Japan, you would say ne, right, or desho. Or a lot of Americans would say right, or ain't it, isn't it, aren't I, don't I? A is just a convenient way to, you know, seek confirmation and seek affirmation from your listener to check that they're listening to you and that they agree with what you're saying. So, for example, I could say, oh, it's really cold today, eh? Pretty cold, eh? Or I can say, oh, this maple syrup is pretty sweet, eh? That's about the extent of the Canadian accent that we use realistically. I've noticed this, though, because my partner, who is Japanese, she is often she's often using a more and more at the end of her sentence. Maybe you know, she's spending too much time with me. All right, so that's it. You know, those are the 4 Canadian stereotypes that I wanted to talk about today. Going back over them, let's run through them again. It's always cold. Not always. It can be very cold. It can be cold for a long time. But, you know, 5 months out of the year, okay, it's pretty cold in Canada. But it also gets quite hot. We love maple syrup. Sure, we love maple syrup as much as anybody in the world loves maple syrup, but it's not really a part of our everyday diet. It's kind of a special treat. We are very polite, sure, but we're as polite as any other country, I think. And lastly, the Canadian accent. I'm going to give a complete no bueno, no on that one. I don't think there's a Canadian accent. We do use a lot. That's about it. So if you had this image of Canada as this maple syrup coated winter wonderland full of polite, funny talking people, sorry to disappoint you, but I hope that you can go to Canada sometime and see what it's really like for yourself. I think you'll really love it. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is a little personal anecdote, right? A story of mine from when I was a kid. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I went with my family to Orlando, Florida, in America, right? We were going for a 1-week trip to Walt Disney World, and that really was one of the best weeks of my life, to be honest. So anyway, we were staying at this kind of resort, this kind of big, wide hotel with, a bunch of pools within the hotel, right? These outdoor pools that people staying at the hotel could go and swim at. And I remember being there, and we were talking to some American kids, right? Me and my older brother, we were talking to these American kids that were about our age, maybe 10 years old, right? And once they found out that we were from Canada, they had all kinds of questions about, what it was like living in Canada, right? And mind you, Canada is not that far from Florida, right? But these kids, they asked us questions like, is it true that you ride a dog sled to school? Like instead of a car, you have a sled that is pulled by dogs, right? And like, have you ever seen a polar bear, right? Do you live in an igloo, like an ice house, right? And my older brother, being the kind of, jerk that he can be sometimes, he was just egging these kids on and, being like, oh, yeah, we have a dog sled, right? We ride it to school every day. Oh, yeah, I have a pet polar bear, right? And these kids were like eating it up, right? They were like, oh, really? Really? Oh, my God, right? Believing every word of it. So, that's kind of a stereotype that Americans have, right? That they don't really know much about other countries. But in that case, those kids, to them, Canada was like this, Arctic, far off, foreign fantasy land, right? That they had only seen in movies, maybe. So, that's kind of a funny little thing. That's why I felt it important to break some Canadian stereotypes. Anyway, thank you for listening to Honto Ego, talking about Canadian stereotypes. If you have a topic that you want me to talk about, please send me an email at hontoego@gmail.com. That's hontoeigo@gmail.com. And please follow me on Instagram at hontoegopod, Pod. There you'll be able to find bonus vocabulary, some pictures of the topic, and other goodies. Thanks again. Oh yeah, and don't eat the yellow snow, eh? Bye-bye.